Have you ever been judged just by the color of your skin? Not by your actions, not by your words, but by a look, one glance, and someone decides who you are. David wasn't expecting anything unusual that morning. He left home early, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, sipping on his coffee as he headed out for a city council meeting. It was supposed to be just another normal day, the kind of day where everything is scheduled down to the minute. But life doesn't follow schedules, especially when you look like David. He was driving through one of the quieter neighborhoods, barely a mile from City Hall, when the red and blue lights began flashing in his rearview mirror. A police car pulled up behind him. No siren, just the lights, no explanation, just pressure. David slowed down, moved to the side, and parked. His heart didn't race. This wasn't his first time. But this time, something felt different. The officer walked up to his window slowly, with a stern face and cold eyes. Without any greeting or explanation, the words came out, license and registration. David, calm but firm, asked, "Officer, may I ask why I'm being pulled over?" The cop didn't flinch. He looked over David's car, then at David, and said with a sneer, "This car doesn't look like it belongs to you." That sentence hit differently. It wasn't just a comment. It was a judgment. And it wasn't about the car. It was about him. David took a breath, reached into his glove compartment and handed over the documents. No protest, no anger, just a quiet look in his eyes, like he knew something the officer didn't. Like he had a secret he wasn't ready to share just yet. And he did because what the officer didn't know was going to turn this simple stop into national news. The real story hadn't even begun yet, and you won't believe what happens next. The officer looked over David's license without even really reading it. His eyes weren't focused on the name or the credentials. They were fixed on David's face, as if he had already made up his mind. David was just another guy trying to look important. "You sure this isn't stolen?" the officer asked, glancing at the luxury dashboard, then back at David with narrowed eyes. David didn't answer right away. He had been through this before, more times than he could count. The questions always changed, but the message was always the same. You don't belong here. But today, he wasn't in the mood to play along. David leaned slightly forward and said calmly, "Why don't you take a closer look at the name on that license, officer?" The cop gave a mocking smile, clearly uninterested. "Don't play games with me," he muttered. "You think wearing a suit makes you somebody?" David didn't flinch. He looked the officer straight in the eye and said, "No, sir, but that ID does." Still, the officer ignored the card in his hand. He started circling the vehicle, inspecting it like he was just waiting for a reason to escalate. Meanwhile, passers-by had started to notice. A few people slowed down in their cars. A woman walking her dog stopped across the street. Phones started recording. And just then a second officer arrived. The first one walked over to him and whispered something while laughing. They both looked back at David, shaking their heads, as if they were sure they had caught someone important, pretending to be more than he was. But in their arrogance, they hadn't even looked at the last line on the license, the one that said, "Mayor, City of Brookline." David stayed seated, composed, watching the scene unfold, knowing full well the storm was coming, because in less than 5 minutes, everything was about to flip. The second officer tapped on David's window, trying to look more official, more in control. He leaned in and said, "Sir, step out of the vehicle." David looked at him calmly and asked, "On what grounds?" There was a pause. The officer shifted uncomfortably, then said, "We're just following protocol." David raised an eyebrow. "What protocol is that? Driving while black?" The officer's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. A small crowd was now forming across the street. A teenager with a camera phone whispered, "Yo, this guy's calm as hell. Something's up." David slowly stepped out of the car, adjusting his blazer like he had all the time in the world. And then, for the first time, He spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. If either of you had read the ID I handed over, you'd realize the mistake you just made. The first cop laughed under his breath. Oh, yeah? And what exactly would we find there? David didn't respond. Instead, he pulled out his phone and made one quick call. No anger in his voice, just one line. Tell security to roll the City Hall press team to Jefferson and 4th. We've got a situation. The color drained from the officer's face. He looked down at the license in his hand again, this time really, reading it. His lips moved silently as he read the words. David R. Lewis. Mayor. Silence. Then panic. The same officer who had mocked him, questioned his right to own the car, and demanded he step out. Suddenly looked like he wanted to disappear. But it was too late. The cameras were already rolling. The truth had already escaped, and what David said next made every jaw drop. The first officer took a step back, holding the license like it had just burned his hand. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The second cop looked from David to the crowd, then back to David. He understood. Now why nothing about this man ever rattled, because he had nothing to prove. David didn't raise his voice. He didn't yell or curse. Instead, he turned to the growing crowd and said calmly, "This isn't about me being mayor. This is about what happens every single day to people who don't have the power to call for cameras." A ripple of silence spread through the bystanders. Phones kept recording. A woman in a nurse's uniform whispered, "My brother got stopped last week, same way." David looked the officers in the eye and continued, "If I hadn't been wearing this suit, if I didn't have this title, I would have just been another suspicious man in a nice car, right?" The cops had nothing to say. Sirens approached. In the distance, not police, but city vehicles. A press van from the mayor's media team pulled up. City staff rushed out with cameras, microphones, and a boom mic already recording. David didn't hide from it. He stood next to the officers, turned to the cameras and said, "Let this moment be seen, because there are thousands of black men pulled over every week who don't get to say, 'I'm the mayor,' and they're treated just like this, or worse." The officers shifted nervously, and then David said something that nobody expected. "I'm not pressing charges. I'm not filing complaints, but I am calling for mandatory anti-bias training for every officer in this department, starting today. No drama, no screaming, just change, delivered with dignity." But even then, the most powerful moment was still to come, because someone in the crowd was about to speak, and what she said turned this story into something unforgettable. Just as David turned to leave, a quiet voice from the crowd called out, "Wait!" Everyone turned. A young black girl, maybe 13 or 14, stepped forward from the sidewalk. She was holding her phone tightly, her hands trembling a little. Her school bag was still hanging from her shoulders. She looked up at David with wide, tearful eyes and said, "I thought people like us didn't stand a chance." The crowd fell into silence again. David walked over to her slowly, knelt down so he was at her eye level, and replied, "People like us don't just stand a chance. We change everything." The girl wiped her cheek, then smiled. A small, brave smile. It was the kind that meant more than words, and in that moment something shifted, not just in the officers standing there, but in every heart watching, both on the street and later, across millions of screens. The video of that traffic stop and the young girl's words went viral in less than 24 hours. It wasn't just about racism. It wasn't just about power. It was about dignity, about being seen, and about what happens when someone who could seek revenge instead chooses to create change. David didn't just walk away from that moment. He turned it into a movement. And the next week, his city announced the largest police reform plan in its history, starting with the department that had pulled him over, because sometimes one quiet voice and one brave response is all it takes to rewrite the story. If this story moved you, even a little, hit the like button, share it, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, true-to-life stories like this one. We've got more coming that you won't want to miss.